let me know if we're good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last official day of Impact Summit 2020. I hope this weekend has treated you well. I've got to admit that I'm pretty excited about the next two speakers, not just because, I'll be hosting them, but also I think that they're pretty inspiring women, both addressing very practical, very real issues that we needed to start talking about yesterday. But I'm curious to know, for those joining us, how many of you have been able to go outside and experience nature during quarantine? I know that for me, I've been stuck in Ontario, so I've been hiking almost every other weekend. By hiking, I mostly mean hiking to the grocery store that's 30 minutes away. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so what have you guys been up to during quarantine? Feel free to, comment. I'm not that interesting. I can't keep this going for much longer. Okay. Well then, anyway, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker of today, Bonnie Lei, who will be talking about the difficulties in working with stakeholders who often have opposing interests when it comes to climate change. And Bonnie Lei is a formidable leader in this space. She discovered a new species, sea slug, in her junior year at Harvard. And after working in Myanmar, South Africa, Uganda, and China, very many places in the world, she is now the head of Global Strategic Partnerships for the AI for Earth initiative at Microsoft. So welcome, Bonnie, and feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Samia, and it's such a pleasure to get to be with all of you today. I hope you're going to be having a great day for the conference. And I'm going to share my screen. I work now for a tech company, and so I'm always a little bit nervous whether or not this is going to work out okay. All right, we'll give this a sec. All righty, hopefully you're going to be seeing my face soon, and now hopefully you're seeing my PowerPoint screen. All right, somebody scream at me if this is not working, but I think we are all squared away now. So exactly like Samia said, I am currently in a role working for a program at Microsoft called AI for Earth, which I'm really excited to get to be a part of. But I don't have a long history working in technology. I actually started out my interest in my career as a conservation biologist. I was absolutely fascinated by the natural world around me and trying to understand how species interacted with each other, how they were surviving in our world. So this is a picture from when I was an undergraduate student, and I had this incredible opportunity to work with endangered African penguins, and I was working at this field research site on this isolated island off the coast of South Africa, trying to better understand how they were adapting to heat stress due to climate change, and working on ways to better design and implement some conservation programs to help that population. And I think this was definitely what started to capture my interest, from just sort of scientifically better understanding wildlife species to really shifting to the application of those scientific concepts and really working on conservation, realizing that there was, such dire impacts coming from climate change, coming from human forces, and how at risk some of these populations were. So after graduating, I continued working in this field. I moved to Myanmar in Southeast Asia, where my grandmother originally is from, and helped the Wildlife Conservation Society, a nonprofit with a presence in the country, start their first marine conservation program. And so this was focused on everything from trying to better understand their fishing practices and move towards more sustainable fishing, and visiting lots of those involved in fishing and in the fishing trade, trade, as well as trying to stem and prevent the catches of illegal shark and ray species and the wildlife trade eventually mostly to China. And so working on this program, I did realize something which was, again, incredibly impactful to get to work on programming like this. But the ways that conservation was traditionally practiced, it oftentimes felt like we were working too slow, or this isn't quite enough. So this picture shows when we were working off on the western shore of Myanmar, and came across this incredibly large catch of vulnerable eagle rays, but clearly discovered this too late after the fishermen had already caught and killed and were drying the animals. And so definitely got me thinking a lot about, like what are some ways that we could try to catch up because we're facing these environmental challenges that feel like they're accelerating ever more quickly and is more and more difficult to address. And so that's actually what really got me into this shift into working for a technology company, because I really do believe that technology is one of the few things that is growing and evolving and developing and innovating as quickly or faster than the rate that environmental challenges are growing. And when the AI for Earth program started about 3 years ago, and I was lucky enough to be part of this founding team, it was with this idea that we want to be able to apply the innovations that are happening in machine learning applied at cloud scale in the computer science space, specifically towards attacking and addressing the biggest challenges in the environmental science space. And so really looking at bridging across these two fields. Over these past 3 years, what we've been working on is, number one, increasing access to cloud and AI technologies, and we provide a number of grants to be able to support environmental organizations. But of course, just providing resources isn't enough. We also run education and training programs in order to help make sure that these organizations are maximizing their use of these resources and are able to sort of stay up to date to some of the new developments that are happening. And finally, identifying areas where there's opportunities for co-work and collaboration across Microsoft data science and engineering teams directly with some of these organizations working in the most promising areas with wide applicability and global scalability. And so to date, we've been able to work with more than 650 projects in more than 90 countries around the world, with projects originating in university research labs to nonprofit organizations to startups. So all sorts of really, really interesting teams that we're able to work with and support. We're really looking at building out these solutions across the entire technology stack, in the sense that it's, it's not enough just to sort of like work in isolation on sort of one problem at a time. In order to be able to scale environmental work on Microsoft's Azure cloud, we need to look at how do we curate and make available the biggest and most useful environmental data sets, make it available for public access on the cloud. How can we build and provide some of this infrastructure that would allow people to easily train algorithms and then publicly share them by deploying as APIs? And how can we host full end-to-end applications in a way so that, again, it could be as accessible and used by as many groups as possible? And so this has led us into this next iteration of our program, where we're working on building what we're calling a planetary computer, or this one centralized platform that would allow a user to log in and be able to access those data sets we mentioned, be able to code and create algorithms, but building upon the work of others who have already been doing work in this area, so that you're able to actually collaborate virtually, and then be able to make your work accessible to others so they could continue to build on your work as well. And so, of course, all of this sounds a little bit abstract. So wanted to share with you a couple of examples of projects so you could sort of understand some of the work that's underway. And so as I just shared with you, a lot of my past background has been in marine conservation, really focused on conservation biology and species. And so you'll see that the examples I'm sharing today will have a little bit of that bent. One group that we've worked with is a nonprofit based out of the UK called Ocean Mind. They're working on addressing the issue of unsustainable and illegal and unreported fishing. Currently, to date, we already have more than 60% of the oceans fully fished, 30% overfished, and leaving only 10% fishable. But the problem, of course, as you can imagine, is even if a country comes up with certain policies or regulations trying to restrict this, trying to enforce that across these large ocean areas is still incredibly difficult. Or for companies that are trying to sell, sustainable seafood and being able to trace that, all of that is very labor intensive and data intensive. So I'm going to share this video.
It's amazing how much humans take from the sea.
Costa Rica is 92% oceans. We want it to be sustainable.
Illegal fisheries are a great threat. It's having an impact in our oceans and in our economy and in our environment.
There's many issues with sourcing sustainable seafood. We are trying to push for that accountability on the water.
Using Microsoft AI, we empower governments, suppliers, and NGOs at scale around the world to prevent illegal fishing in a way that just wasn't possible before. At Ocean Minds, we receive billions of data points, satellite images, optical imagery, radar imagery, infrared data. We use Microsoft AI to recognize different types of fishing activity, the identity of the vessel, and whether that vessel had a license. We find the suspicious activities so that our analysts can look and investigate it, and governments can enforce more effectively.
Now we have data, we can identify vessels, we can identify patterns of illegal fishery and support the Coast Guard.
The ability to have third-party verification is crucial in protecting us and our brand as we sell seafood throughout the world.
We are making our first API available through Microsoft AI for Earth to anyone who wants to help fight illegal fishing.
The time for taking care of the oceans is now.
We have the capabilities to change the needle on the sustainability of fishing. I am convinced that we will make a difference.
Yeah, so I absolutely love this story from Ocean Mind because, again, we're talking about not just the development of technology in isolation, right? It's not just creating this really cool algorithm that's able to track vessels in the ocean, but they were able to work in a way directly in collaboration with some of those end users. So knowing what the needs were of these governmental entities that needed to work on policy regulation, working with companies like Costco who are working on being able to do some of this sustainable supply chain tracking across the sources of the seafood they were selling, and looking at how it is that there really is this co-development of being able to meet the needs of those who are working on the front lines and providing the technology that was going to be directly useful. So this other bit that I'm going to share with you, if we're going to be able to pop over to the screen here, is this another nonprofit organization called WildMe that's based in the US. They work on creating what they call wild books for different at-risk species. And so I'm going to run through a quick demo with you now of a wild book for whale sharks. Wild books are really, really cool because they essentially help track automatically individual animals through images, through video, in order to help provide additional tracking data for scientists who are doing all sorts of research to better understand how to best protect this species as a whole. And again, you can imagine, like, I had done a lot of work, so I know this firsthand. When you're trying to track species over space and time, it could be incredibly labor intensive to be putting on trackers, to be like setting up all of these different observational studies to try to gather the data that you need. But there's lots of humans walking around, regular people like you or I, who may be, going on a dive trip, going on a safari, happen to be, like interacting and capturing some information, and you might be posting pictures on social media or videos on YouTube. And this is data that, if properly tagged, could actually be useful for the biodiversity scientists, and could be adding to their data storage. And this is, again, just like info that is out there already in the wild, so why not find a way to make that useful? So Wildbook does exactly that, with the use of their intelligent agent that crawls through all of the, again, like publicly posted social media posts of any sort. And so this intelligent agent is focused on whale sharks as a species. So they go through and they're looking for anybody who's posted anything new about whale sharks. The intelligent agent wakes up every 24 hours. So let's imagine every night, intelligent agent wakes up and it's looking through and it has found this. Oh, it's looking over YouTube. It seems to have found this video that is interesting. They're detecting this is in Spanish, buceo con dominos. They've translated this to English, and they realize that it's hitting upon some of their keywords, indicating that this is dominos, or a whale shark, in Spanish. And so now they're going to be extracting some of the key video frames. They're looking across this video and see that this truly is showing whale sharks as a part of this. So this is going to be something that is of interest. And as a next step, the agent is now automatically going to pull up some of the frames that were captured across the video that were of interest. And they want to be able to eventually identify exactly which whale shark is captured. Whale sharks have these patterns on their skin, the dots and the lines, that serves essentially similarly as a human fingerprint. It's unique for every single individual. And so this algorithm goes through, captures some of the images with some clear pictures of that pattern, and is working through and trying to make that ID. Right. And so you can look at this and it looks like individual H019 is the one that has the highest levels of confidence match, that this pattern that is seen is the one that is very similar to the patterns that are seen of this specific individual. So let's work on matching it to H019. All right. And so what we found here is that we wanted to actually communicate directly with this poster, right? Because we were able to extract exactly which day she filmed it. It's published on this date, and it had a date on the video. We wanted to actually give it a geolocation tag. And so by automatically, this bot is interacting with the diver, is able to provide the location information. And so now we have a full geo tagged with location, date, and we know exactly what individual is here. We also want to be able to encourage some of these, what we're calling citizen scientists in the community, to continue to interact with us, to continue to provide this useful data. And so we're able to reply, give Nuria a thank you for providing some useful information to help us keep the record full. And we also let her know that this whale shark that we found is H019, and we have a page available. You could think of it sort of like almost like a Facebook page for individual whale sharks. You'll see that this whale shark, his name is John Cena. If you go around this Wildbook page later, there's some unadopted whale sharks that if you could adopt, you could actually provide a name to as well. And so John Sina the shark. As you could see, there's all sorts of observations that have been collected, whether that's like direct scientific observations or some of these trawling across social media that we've seen. We're able to do some of these like really cool mappings to be able to see how it is that John Cena, the whale shark, has interacted with other whale sharks in the greater ocean. You could see the sort of the locations over time of where John Cena is swimming and where he has been observed. And all of this, again, is useful for scientists who come to the site and are able to download these data files. And you can see like these researchers who are all really invested in this work. So again, another example of how a number of different technologies on this back end here is feeding into this one application to allow all of this. Like, again, there's no human involved in any of the steps that I just walked through. All of this was completely automated. And so the fact that you can now collect and trawl through all of this data without having to spend any extra scientist time or human time on that effort, they could focus it completely on the sort of the analysis of the data is something that is super promising for being able to get us closer to conservation. And so with that, we'll wrap up the presentation portion, and I could stay on for about the next 10 minutes or so, and would love to answer any questions that may be coming in from the audience or from you, Soumya.
Awesome. This is, I really love the examples that you gave. At some point, so I have a few questions while the audience thinks about this, but at some point you mentioned thinking that technology can help us move quicker. So obviously you entered the tech space as a non-technologist, and I think that must have been a little bit intimidating. So what were your biggest or most unexpected transitions or challenges when transitioning from working in the research sector to one of the largest tech companies in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was definitely different in some ways. I would say, like from my day-to-day life or what I was doing, right? It transitioned from working directly in the field. I was based like in essentially a field position full time. And so going from that, from living in a tiny fishing village on the western coast of Myanmar to now sitting in fluorescently lit cubicle and in a company setting. So I think, like even that was definitely a bit of a shock. I think one of the pieces that was particularly exciting about getting to work directly in a company like Microsoft was that you had direct access to the research that was being developed for potentially other purposes, but like some of this like cutting edge AI technology. And so getting to work sort of directly with the people who are developing, looking at, and again, like my role, it's like, of course, I don't have a background in technology. And so that was intimidating. But my role specifically on the team is I don't have to be working on building the code. I need to be working on linking the on the ground people working on environmental conservation to the technology resources. So I need to have enough of a grasp of technology to understand where it could potentially be the most useful, what it can and cannot do. And so setting some of that feasibility requirements. And then similarly, having an understanding on the environmental side of what are the problems to address that are the most pressing, what are the types of solutions that could be potentially useful across multiple teams or in multiple areas around the world. And so focusing on those problems that are pressing, but also scalable first and foremost. And so in that sense, it isn't necessarily like I've like left that research world, because a lot of my time is interfacing and interacting with very much the types of organizations like the ones I've worked with before. And working and understanding on their needs, and just now being able to come with a set of technology resources to be able to provide for the needs that they've identified.
And just speaking to your role at Microsoft AI for Good initiative, one of our teammates, Elvin, has a question. What career or roles are available at Microsoft's AI for Good? And could you answer this also in terms of a student perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's if your background is specifically in technology, and so you're looking at, like joining from the perspective of you actually want to be developing that technology specifically towards social good issues, including AI for Earth and environmental issues. But we also have AI for Good programs now that span a couple of areas. We have AI for health, AI for accessibility, AI for humanitarian action, and AI for cultural heritage. And so there is a dedicated team that's working on like that, like the data scientists and engineers who are working on projects specifically across all of those AI for Good areas. When job openings are available for that, those are absolutely posted on our Microsoft job website. And so definitely opportunities to work directly on that team. If your interest is more broadly just like in sustainability overall, and you have interests that that span, like you're not a technical person like me, but you're interested in some of these other aspects. We do have a site. I could share the hyperlink or the URL with you later. That's just like lists every single open position within the sustainability team. Of course, that changes over time, but we have some technical positions that are open now, and we also have some that are more focused on partnerships or focused on business development or things like that.
Thanks, that would be helpful. I think we have time for 2 more questions, so if no one else has questions, I still have mine. I think Microsoft, among some other big companies like Google, Amazon, they've started to take climate change a bit more seriously, and a lot of these companies started to publish their plans to address their contributions to climate change. But for me, as an outsider and as a skeptic, at first glance, it seems like big tech companies are focusing on treatment rather than prevention. They're failing to address the causes. Can you speak a little to this?
Yeah, sure. So again, I can't speak on behalf of all the tech companies, but I could definitely speak on some of what Microsoft is doing. So if you're interested in general, so like I again spoke very specifically about the work that our AI for Earth program does. But if you're interested more broadly in some of the work that our environmental sustainability team does, 2020 has actually been a very exciting year for us. We've been absolutely focused on thinking through what is the company's impact by the way it operates, and how it could work through and think about how to minimize and offset those impacts as much as possible, in addition to what I was mainly speaking about, which is the application of technology to also helping fight some of the most key areas. And so one bit, like if you're interested, I would highly recommend looking at some of the announcements that we've been putting out on a bit of like a quarterly cadence. So the first that you saw came out in January of this year was really focused on carbon. And that was a combination of thinking through, well, we've been operating as a carbon neutral company for since 2012. But that, like in this day and age really isn't sufficient and isn't enough like responsibility to be taking. And so we've committed to being carbon negative. So actually removing more carbon from the atmosphere than we've been putting out through our operations, and going back in time actually and removing more emissions than we've ever put. So from removing all of our historical emissions from when the company was first operating. And so that again, I think is setting this new level of what companies need to be doing in order to like their commitments of what their own environmental responsibility is. But also at the same time, realizing, it's one thing to just set an ambition like that. It's another piece to think through, how can we actually work towards addressing that level of carbon reduction and putting forth a $1 billion fund called the Climate Impact Fund, which is completely focused, the Climate Innovation Fund, which is completely focused on providing the funding and providing the support to all of the innovative methods that are being developed now that actually could get us to a level where the carbon reduction, where the carbon extraction is going to be able to happen at a rate and at a cost level that's going to allow many other companies and many other organizations who are thinking about this level of responsibility to feasibly do similar commitments as well. So I think that's just one example in the carbon space. We also have similar announcements that have come out already focused on ecosystems and waste. And we will soon be making an announcement in September about similar sort of ambitious levels of commitments we're setting in water. So we're definitely thinking through what it means to be operating in this day and age, what's the responsibility that needs to be taken, and what are ways that using what Microsoft is good at, how we could contribute most to the solution.
I'm definitely looking forward to the September publication. I think we have time for one more question. So you spoke a little bit about how Microsoft is alleviating one of the barriers for startups, which is funding. But one of our audience members, Angelina, is asking, what kind of barriers do you see that organizations might have when trying to use Microsoft's AI for Earth? And has Microsoft done anything to help remedy this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Came at a really good time because I would say from the first sort of like 2.5 or so years of the program operation, right? Like we've just started the program. AI for Earth itself was very much sort of a startup within Microsoft. And we've learned along the way of what allowed organizations to be able to best make use of the resources we were putting out. Where do we see fewer people being able to make use of that? And that sort of like those lessons led into this new iteration of the program that I mentioned in this planetary computer we're going to build. And so a couple of big learnings we essentially took away and put into that new plan is, number one, it really sort of gets down to the crux of it's not easy enough just to say like, hey, here is access to the cloud. Now do your environmental work on it, right? Like environmental work comes with incredibly large data sets. Working on moving data sets from place to place and, like trying to think through ways to store it long term, all of that is like, that actually becomes a considerable roadblock. And so we're working now on making it like, essentially work on eliminating that roadblock by saying like the largest data sets, the ones that are most commonly used in the space, we need to put those directly on the cloud, directly on Azure, and make it so that anybody would be able to access that very easily. The other piece was definitely looking at how to help our individual grantees, individual partners, build on the work of each other, because you could like with 650 grants around the world, you could imagine that there's definitely people who are working in similar areas, who are working on tackling similar problems, and without sort of a common platform to go to, without some sort of canonical starting blocks to build off of, everyone is sort of starting over from scratch when they want to essentially do like a individual animal identification algorithm for snow leopards versus for elephants, and like everyone's sort of like recreating the wheel. And so that's a piece where we see like, like a big piece of being able to help folks build on the work of each other, and also help people who maybe want to use algorithms but are not able to create them themselves. We need to be able to have, again, a centralized place where that work can be shared, and the people who create things would be able to post them in a way that others could either, if you're a technology person, build on top of that, or perhaps directly consume it if you're just looking at using that as a practitioner. So definitely some exciting days ahead for AI for Earth for sure, and lots that we've learned in the years of operation so far.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any more time?
I unfortunately do have to pop off, but would just sort of like leave with this comment that again, it's great to hear that so many young people are interested in this topic. We absolutely want to see more people apply their skills to the big environmental issues that we're facing nowadays. And the way that I sort of think of it is environmental issues are like so interdisciplinary. They require people with all sorts of different skills and backgrounds. And no matter sort of like what it is that you're working in, you absolutely have an ability to contribute. I like, again, day to day at Microsoft, right, work with many data scientists, engineers, computer scientists, so technology driven folks. But I also work with people who are focused on PR and marketing, folks who are doing interesting business development and business models to allow some of these innovative startups to thrive and survive, designers who are working on better ways to communicate visually and reach more people. So again, like all sorts of different people with different skills. And so would really highly encourage if you're interested in making sure your skills are being applied to social good, take advantage of the skills that you have. There's lots to contribute.
Thank you so much for that. And just like your answer to the last question we had, sharing is awesome. So thank you for sharing with us today. I'm sure a lot of people here are going to check out the work that Microsoft is doing and piggyback off of that. So thank you again, and I hope you have a good day.
Yeah. Have a great rest of the summit, everyone. Great to be speaking with you. And thanks again, Samia, for the conversation.
Yep. For the rest of us, since Bonnie has left early, we have about 20 minutes before our career expo that starts at 12. The link will be in Slack on how to talk to some of these companies. While we're waiting, during those 20 minutes, please remember to vote for the social startup competition projects, and maybe you can catch each other on Glimpse too. See ya.